the topic for it was why does my job matter? So I assume this means you're all in existential crises that you guys came to this. For a second, Shay walked in and she works at Boys the Ball, and I was like, "Come on, you." So that was an HR concern for us, but no, this is to frame it, and then in a second I'll let Mark and Matt introduce themselves a little bit. But it comes from a conversation that exists of what does it look like to see the marketplace as a missionary field, and not a missionary field necessarily in the sense that we are sending somebody to just do programs and to raise funds for it and then to go out and proclaim the gospel, but a missionary field in that everyone, the moment that you sign up to follow Jesus, you also sign up for the Great Commission. And so because of that, we all step into the role of being priests, or step into the role of being missionaries. And I made everyone in the young leader track that I was just in say, I am a missionary. Just because it's important that you know that. There's nobody on the bench in this game. And so there's over the last years there's been incorrect thinking that's happened, and something that I always like to talk about is I remember as a kid always thinking about levels of spirituality. And to me, you would hear the 1040 missionary come to your church, and he was the most spiritual, the highest level of spirituality. Then there was the inner city missionary, and he was a little less spiritual because he got to live with
a brown belt.
Yeah, with warm water still, but it was still cool. He was doing it. Then it was the head pastor, and then it was the elders. Then it way lowers the worship leader. Then very bottom is the youth pastor. And then there was everyone else. And the idea was slightly that there was those that are in the workplace and their job, and they had to suffer it and throw the money over to the other side. And that was just some of the perception that came out of going to a church and the way that it got presented. And that was an incorrect presentation of what was happening. Some of it, not to diminish generosity, which we really don't. We are called to be generous, and so if God blesses you with wealth, use it in a thoughtful way. But also recognizing most of us will spend more time with our coworkers than we will with our own families. And so if we then say that is not a missionary field, we are spending a huge portion of our life saying that God can't touch this or use this. And so the goal for today is really to turn some of the perception of what if your job meant more than your paycheck. So we have two great conversationalists. We don't want to just be speakers today, so I think our hope is to get into a conversation more than anything. And so please also, if you have a thought or question, don't yell it out, but find the right moment to interject. Bless you. But we have two great speakers who we had some pre-thought on how this would go, but I wanted to first give a chance for both of you to say what your name is, where you're from, what do you do?
I'm a little uncomfortable sitting down, but if we stood up, it would look like I was Matt's kid. So I think we'll just stay here. I am Mark Woodruff. I come from Southern California. I have lived all over the country. I currently live in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm a family doctor in a large practice, which I'm fortunate and proud to say is the #2 Medicare practice in the United States. It's an extremely innovative and creative place to work, and a very supportive environment. I'm also chairman of the board of Boy with the Ball Global, and I'm the father of 3 and the grandfather of 6, whose pictures are on my shirts.
This is custom. You can't just buy one of these.
I think that's probably enough.
And I'm Matt Brennan. I currently live in Memphis, Tennessee. I've been there since 2013. I serve as the general partner for a limited partnership that invests in contracting companies. So I spent 14 years in industrial construction, and now with a group of investor funds, we buy private contracting companies, provide them with coaching and growth strategies and partnership. I've known the Boyd Ball team for a long time. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. Was in Camp of Champions, what it used to be called, many years ago. And just thankful and have been part of supporting Boyd Ball, traveling to visit in-country teams, and just thinking together for quite a while. So, and I've got 3 kids. My son Aiden's 21. He went right to work out of high school. Middle daughter Abby is here with me, and she just graduated high school 3 weeks ago. She's going to the University of Tennessee, Knoxville next fall, and then my youngest Olivia is a rising senior.
Well, thanks, guys. We're gonna jump right in, but some of it is maybe just to frame some general thoughts. But the market as a mission place, the first question is just what's the value? What's the importance of people then seeing their work as a potential mission place?
Well, I think it's the reality. We struggle against this separation of church and state and separation of sacred and secular, and the enemy would like us to limit church to Wednesday night and Sunday mornings, but as you said, we're not participating in a club or an organization. We are members of a family, and you're that part of that family every moment of every day of your life. And part of the purpose of that family is to invite others to join. So that's part of what we are doing, always, everywhere. And again, like you said, we're mostly at work, for better or worse. So that's our mission field.
Is there something you would add, Matt?
How many of you would admit that you've watched the show The Office? Work is a real community. It's a real team. It's a real place, at least in our culture, where people find meaningful relationships. They go home, and as my kids say, doom scroll on their phone. So their real relationships may be exclusively workplace relationships. So I think it's great news. It's exciting. I enjoy being at work. I love going there. So I think it's where a lot of people we know find connection and get shaped.
So where does the disconnect come in? How do we get to the place where all of a sudden, if we know these things and we understand what Jesus is saying, that we're called to go out, make disciples of all nations, baptize people in my name, if we see that in the Bible, the disciples were largely marketplace leaders that were getting called out into mission. What has happened where there's the disconnect in the culture that isn't being thought of or in that way?
For me, I think the last couple hundred years in America, we've thought of ourselves identity-wise as a Christian nation. So you can kind of take for granted that a school, community, all of these things would raise up a person to be a great citizen and probably believe in God and maybe know Jesus. And for me, being 46, living in 1969, our country started changing. By the time I was a teenager and coming out of college and coming into work, I personally began viewing our nation as unreached and unchristian. So instead of thinking of myself as King David inside of, Israel, a righteous nation that follows God and functioning through governmental, authority and the infrastructure of the nation, I started thinking of myself as Daniel, a captive in the midst of a pagan land. So I now needed to be filled with the Spirit and implanted in that pagan system with excellence and a love for the Lord, And then over time, I learned that he would engineer crises, just like he did with Daniel, for me to be the main character in, and exhibit his glory. So, I think the issue is identity. Do I think of myself as a person that is under the lordship of Jesus and available to him in all aspects of my life? Or am I a Christian who goes to church and then has the rest of my life as sort of separate? Once that identity issue is dealt with, things start to make sense.
I think the enemy is perfectly happy to have us go to church and think about how hypocritical we think the other people in the pews are. You know, and so I agree 100% with what you said. We need to find our identity in Christ, and that identity needs to be present 100% of the time.
Yeah, it's also worth noting that there is an increase. We lose the game when there's a hyper compartmentalization of faith, because we have to recognize the enemy's attacks are not compartmentalized.
Mhm.
We are more and more seeing where the separation of church and state, the separation of companies' values are striking you right in the face, not because it's necessarily what they believe, but because it's going to make them the most money to believe these exact things in this moment in
Or
a way
at
that
least to say they do.
or to say they do, because it will be what because their interest is not the betterment of a community as much as it's the value of a stockholder. And so if we are then compartmentalized, we are surrendering a huge level of capacity where the enemy is going to be entering and to take that land. So then for you guys, what does it look like to minister in the workplace?
So for me, I have my coworkers and my patients. You know, other places you have your coworkers and your customers. Well, they are my customers. And it can look like 1,000 different things, but it starts with value. Some of the things Jamie talked about yesterday in the small group here, the workshop. Valuing my coworkers, looking for their highest good, doing what I can to help them develop professionally, running it up the flagpole, running my faith up the flagpole. I'm just out with, I got prayed for yesterday and my knee's better, or whatever it is. And then for my patients, it's taking the attitude of a servant and praying for patients. I have been amazed that I have never had a patient refuse to be prayed for in 20 plus years. And I certainly don't do it, you come in with a cold, I'm not really going to take that time, but there are certainly moments in a patient's life where there isn't any other answer. And so trust that the Lord responds to those prayers.
I would align with what was said yesterday from Jerry and John Stanko. Just understanding that it means a whole lot to Jesus that there's quality carpet in this room, or that these chairs are well constructed. We're just he's the king of the expanding universe, and engineering is sacred. Construction is sacred. Music, everything we do, what he made you that you're into is sacred. It's not like a byproduct. That alone is important. So that idea of ministry, for me, does begin with excellent work. Like excellent work. Study accounting with zeal. Study your trade with zeal, and don't have any shame. Read about Daniel. He and his friends were experts in pagan literatures, and they brought something to the table that was excellent and necessary. And then, as I said before, what I found is that the Lord, you're being you, and you're drawing as closely as you can to the Lord personally, that great privilege to love him, is his command. You're pursuing the thing he made you to do, and then he will engineer circumstances where you're kind of on the spot sometimes, and you're prepared to give an answer.
Right.
He ended up at Lion's Den, the fiery furnace, but the evangelization of Babylon came about through these crises and their stand with the Lord. And there's a million smaller ways. I'm sure Daniel ministered to thousands of people, prison guards, just with who he was, his kindness, his love. So those things begin to really liberate you to just be yourself with the Lord where he's placed you. And then the concepts we've learned here, coach, team, field, all play out. John said, let the Lord send you. If you're seeking to be sanctioned by a nonprofit or a church to send you, just drop that idea. Jesus is not I'm going to throw a little bit, maybe too much out there, but Jesus is not a constitutional monarch. Anybody know what that term means? Like, this is the Queen. The Queen of England is a figure. She's placed off to the side. They have a constitution and a parliament. The parliament really runs the country. Jesus isn't that kind of king. He's the literal head of the church. So he is the one who gives us our assignments. And of course he works through people. But a lot of folks are waiting like, I can't do anything until I'm sanctioned by my church or some other group to go do ministry. No. Jesus, you, and your friend at work are a holy and sacred team set apart, appointed by him to do something. That's enough. It's way more than enough. And then love, excellence in what you do are enough. And then be ready for him to engineer a potential crisis. He does amazing things in a crisis. He reveals the glory of his name. We shouldn't avoid that.
There's a lot to chew on in that. There's some of it, and Tyler mentioned it today from the stage, and I've heard you also say this, Matt. There is an overemphasis in the Western Church on proclamational ministry. If I can just say Jesus' name to each person, that will be what brings each person to Jesus. And that then also, if we escalate that de-escalates incarnational ministry, the chance to come in and love and serve and be a God-defined, non-anxious presence that allows people to taste and see the Lord is good, not by the way that you are speaking, but by the fact that there's something different about you. There's another quote that I said to the young people a second ago, but Leslie Newbegin mentions, live your life in a way that causes people to ask questions where the only answer to those questions is the Holy Spirit moving in you. When Francis Assisi says, always preach only when necessary, use words. When Martin Luther says a great Christian cobbler doesn't draw little crosses on all the shoes, he makes excellent shoes. And so how do we do things with excellence that then points people to the fact that there's something a little different about Daniel and his guys? It doesn't quite make sense, but it's there. You've got to recognize it, and it brings people to the face of Jesus without necessarily cramming them or forcing them to it, but it's the way that God is making himself known through you. What are some stories of where you've seen how God has moved through your faithfulness and your work?
So, there's fun and exciting stories about patients, but I think the more interesting one is right now, my nurse, when she joined my team, she was probably only attending work 60 to 80% time. She had an FMLA, she has an FMLA form filled out by her psychiatrist that says she cannot show up whenever she doesn't want to, and they can't fire her. So she just didn't come to work a lot. And so basically I spent a year building trust with her, and now we're really 3 years later. I don't think she's missed a day in the last 6 months. And she loves to work with me. And then in the process, we develop friendship. And, you know, when I go away, I bring back some little token for her and for both of my nurses. And so then I invited her to a home group. We had a home group social event. And she came with her boyfriend, and we got to know each other a little better. And she loves my wife. Everybody likes her better anyway. And, you know, we're just beginning to talk about we've talked about spiritual things, but now we're talking about her spirituality. And she has a great fear of the church and a great, she always says, I can't open the Bible or go to church because I'll burn up. I'll just burn on the spot like the Wicked Witch of the West. So we're, you know, it's a process, but it's been enjoyable and encouraging to see her blossom.
Yeah, what, I'm happy to say I don't know the meaning of the acronym you used, FL, that obviously.
Oh, sorry.
So disability is of burden.
Yeah, it's, what is it?
Family medical leave.
Thank you,
medical.
thank you.
Federal
The doctor
protection.
doesn't
I
know,
knew
but
it had to be
the
something like
engineer
that.
does. Yes,
I don't know
exactly. So,
myself.
yeah, she can miss days.
Yeah, okay, I know what you meant, yeah.
So Young Life has a great phrase, earn the right to be heard. They're
Mhm.
talking about young people. You can't speak truth into a young person's life till you earn the right to be heard. And I just think that work and excellence creates that opportunity. Mark can pray the patient because he went to medical school. And he is a doctor. Like he's built that, he's got the right to stand there and say, I'm an expert in what's happening medically, and I can also tell you that there's a spiritual solution that's even better. Who better to say that, you know? So I found that for me, in the days when I was just an underling serving the vision, I became a leader because I was effective in industrial construction. But then once I was a leader, I could now start holding prayer meetings because I'm the boss. I can say, anybody that would like to come to a weekly prayer meeting, you can come. So we started company prayer meeting. It was interesting to see people show up in time that would say, I don't really know God, but I wanted to come to the meeting. We're like, come on in. And, you know, I thought that was interesting. And then we began to tell stories about when God was answering prayer. We kept the prayer focused on issues within the business. And then we started talking about a God-dependent leadership strategy, and how we can do our best, but he's got to finish certain things, and we would share those stories. And then all of a sudden you just feel this environment of God awareness happening. And then a few months ago when the solar eclipse came, so I laugh because these aren't strategies. You just love the Lord and you work, and he starts to say, why don't you try this, and you do it. A guy in the accounting team had been in and around this, you know, spiritual environment in the workplace. He's a non-believer. The solar eclipse is coming, and for some reason, this just triggers in him an existential quest for meaning. And he's reading stuff, and he's like, "What's going on?" And he's like, he grabs the nearest Christian that he knows is in our workplace and says, "I need to know again, what is this all about?" She shares the gospel, and he's baptized, and you know, that just happened a few weeks ago. But we didn't plan that. Like it just, you're trying to love the Lord yourself, be excellent, and then let his aroma expand. And then we ask nonprofit partners, what do you guys do? And start trying to implement those things. I started doing walkthroughs on our lunch hour, and I just grab somebody and be like, let's go walk through this neighborhood near our office, you know. And we learn, we've tried disciple making movements from West Africans, and we just find a sponsor and try to release things, and then eventually have spiritual metrics. So our report card on revenue, profit, safety. We also have a ministry section where we ask the leaders to buy in to setting specific goals for ministry inside and adjacent to the company and hitting them, and you invite. And you tell everybody openly, you don't have to be a Christian to work here, but that's our why, and we want you to know.
Yeah. But
you're welcome. Come on in. We all have to pursue the mission of being the best as a company. Our purpose is to glorify God. And it seems to work. I'm sure there will be a crisis moment for us, like Hobby Lobby and others. Chick-fil-A, you've seen become a lightning rod. Great. Let God be glorified.
When I was in college, my goal was always to never have to work during the semesters.
You
and
went to
so
college?
you would be. It's a small community college that's called the University of Georgia. Harvard's so great, why aren't they national champions? But my
we
goal.
don't talk about that right now.
My goal was to never have to work during the semesters. So what that meant was my goal was over the summers to work between 90 and 110 hours a week, just because I wanted to be able to be completely free during the semesters. And so when I met Jesus in May of 2018, my life was dramatically changing, and I was spending 90 to 110 hours a week working as a bartender at a Margaritaville. And I just remember thinking, well, if my life just changed, my work should change. And so I went from being slightly tipsy for most of my shifts to being very sober, which changed the way that I was working dramatically in those 90 to 110 hours. Already there was vast improvement in my work.
You enjoyed it.
But then there was this girl that would always be the bar back for the bar, and a lot of her job was just peeling oranges and limes so that they were ready for us in any moment. Her name was Shannon. And she was a beautiful girl. She was also going to UGA, and we would just talk, and she had a good sense of humor. And she was one of those girls who was clearly too smart for the party girl scene that she was in, but was then also still filling this role. And so we would talk, and then somewhere along the way she decided, "You're not drinking as much these days." And I said, "Yeah, what makes you think that?" She's like, "You don't break as many glasses, which means I don't have to sweep them." And I said, "Yeah." And so I was like, "Yeah, I had this thing with Jesus the other day," which I didn't know how to say it in a very clear way. And she was like, "Yeah," she said, "I don't know about Jesus." I was like, "Okay." Anyway, not much happened out of it. Then she came one week, and she was usually she was very funny. And she came one week, and she wasn't quite there. And I said, "You okay?" And she said, "Yeah, my mom had a stroke." And I was like, "What does that?" I was like, "What does that mean?" They're like, "They don't think she'll be able to walk again." And so she said, my dad and I were just talking yesterday, and he said that he's too busy on work this semester. So he asked if I would pull out of college for a semester so I could watch her. And I then was just with her, and I said, "Shannon, I'm really sorry about that." I said, "That was a big deal." I said, "How are you handling it?" She said, I haven't even begun to emotionally handle it." And I said, "Shannon, I said, I know that Jesus just did something in my life." And I said, "I know that you don't know how you feel about it, but can I pray with you?" And she looked at me tearfully and just said, "Yes." And so I prayed with her, and it wasn't anything that dramatic. And we kind of just kept going. I pushed it back to joking, partially just to bring her spirit up, and we keep going. And then finally, a few months later, Molly and I start dating, and she starts to just ask me about how Molly and I are dating, and why are we so focused on getting married, and she just said, "I think," and then she had a sense, she's like, "Over the last months of staying home from college, I've found myself thinking, I think I'm gluttonous." She was like, not food-wise, but I think I just do things because it satiates me. And it was I told Shannon, I was like, "That's a deeper thought than most people are having." And she said, "But it seems like the way that you're doing life isn't that gluttonous." And I found out, I didn't know if gluttonous was the right word for her in that moment, but it was the word that she was there was something where God was clearly speaking to her, even though she wouldn't have even noticed it happening. And so then I said, "You probably need to meet Molly." And so she said, "Would you come over to our house?" And then I come into her house, and I quickly realized, and I had no idea about this, that she was a very wealthy girl, an incredible, like, it was one of those houses where there was a gate to get to the gate. And her dad does the flooring for mansions, and so she spent a long time saying, this is the living room floor, it's the same floor that Jennifer Lopez has. And then she kept going through and like saying, this is our dining room floor, same as Simon Cowell. And I said, do you do flooring for non-American Idol judges? And then she said, could you meet my mom? And I sat down with her mom, and she said, she came back and she told me that you prayed for her. And I was like, I was slightly ready for like how weird this would go. She says, we don't know how we feel about faith, but we want you to pray for us as well. And so I prayed with her. And I have been shocked that Shannon has never fully just become Christian, but she will text me randomly and just say, hey, my mom's doing better. I just wanted to keep you informed. And I am aware that I never have gotten to a place where it's just tagged and bagged with her. And but there's a long-term process that's happening that's longitudinal, and it's supernatural, and it's beyond what I see. But it's just the steady presence that ends up mattering.